Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Snail-less-cargo. That's right, I probably shouldn't have posted this on April 1st, since people are going to think this meatless version of escargot is some kind of April Fool's gag, which it kind of is. But it was also a very fun culinary experiment, and as everybody knows, one of the toughest things about becoming a vegetarian is no longer being able to enjoy snails. So every once in a while, I do like to throw our vegetarian viewers a bone, pardon the expression, and so this video is officially dedicated to them. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And what makes this snail-less-cargo is the fact we're going to use mushrooms. And unlike literally every other food you eat, which is nourished and controlled by the sun, mushrooms are ruled by the moon, which is why I was thinking of branding these as moon snails. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that sounds kind of stupid. So I'm not going to do that. But regardless, we are going to stuff our shells with mushrooms. So what I did is I took a pound of brown mushrooms, which I washed very well, and then I took a paring knife and trimmed off the stem just above the cap, at which point I cut them in half, because I figured once that was cooked, that would be the approximate size of canned escargot. But then I decided to give it one extra little cut right through the cap like this, about halfway through, and my hope was that little cut would help soak in more of that garlic parsley butter. And also, snails do have lots of little nooks and crannies. So anyway, I went ahead and prepped my mushrooms as shown, and then I knew I was going to have to cook these somehow before stuffing them in the shell. So I decided to take a saucepan with a couple cups of water, to which I added a spoon of miso and some seaweed, because I was trying somehow to increase the savoriness of the mushroom and possibly even give it some hints of flavor that you might find in a snail. So I figured the miso would give me some saltiness and savoriness, and then a little bit of that nori seaweed might possibly give me that essence of garden. And I believe I did mention this was an experiment, so I was totally shooting from the hip here. But anyway, that's what I was trying to do. And to that end, I also added a nice big splash of soy sauce. And I brought that mixture up to a simmer on high heat. And then once I saw it bubbling, I went ahead and added my mushrooms. And then I reduced the heat to medium-low and simply simmered them for about 10 minutes, stirring occasionally. And like I said, I was hoping they would absorb some of that background flavor from the broth, which as it turns out, they really didn't. So if I ever try these again, which I won't, I think instead of liquid, I'll just brown these really, really well, which I'm guessing is going to give them a lot more meatier flavor, which I kind of already knew in the back of my mind. But hey, you really don't know for sure until you try something. I mean, ask anyone that doesn't try things. They'll tell you. But anyway, like I said, we simmered those for about 10 minutes, at which point they look like this. So they definitely shrunk up as cooked mushrooms will do. And once those mushrooms are cooked, I just turned off the heat and decided to just let them sit in that liquid while we prepped our snail-less-cargo butter, which is going to be remarkably similar to a classic escargot butter. So we'll start with half a cup of margarine. April Fools, just kidding. Margarine is not real food, so don't eat it. We're actually going to start with some real, high-quality, unsalted butter, to which we're going to add a ton of garlic. That was like 4 or 5 very, very finely minced cloves. We will also do a little bit of minced shallot. They have that in all the grocery stores now. And then, of course, a handful of freshly chopped Italian parsley. That is mandatory. And then we're also going to want to season this up with a very generous pinch of salt, some freshly ground black pepper, and then, so they know it's one of ours, a little shake of cayenne. And then last but not least, to French this up a little bit, I'm going to give it a little splash of Pernod. Oh yeah, the D is silent. In fact, the O is almost silent. And if you haven't had it, Pernod has sort of a licorice flavor. Okay, think the herb tarragon. That's sort of the flavor profile. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of that. And then we'll take a fork and we'll mash that all together. So a fairly intensely flavored, highly seasoned mixture. Remember, this stuff was originally invented to make people forget they were eating garden slugs. Although I'm guessing slugs and snails are different. And now I'm going to get a bunch of emails from people with too much time on their hands. You know, people like me. But anyway, like I said, let's go ahead and mix that up. And once that's set, we can move on to final production. So what I did is I drained my mushrooms, and of course made the fatal flaw of not tasting them at this point, because they really needed salt. So if I do make these again, which I won't, I'm definitely going to season those with more salt at this point. So we have our mushrooms ready, we have our butter ready. Now all we need is some snail shells, which unless you know someone that works at a French restaurant and can borrow some for you, you'll probably have to order online. And what you want to order are extra large snail shells. And yes, they are beautiful. And by the way, if you put one of these up to your ear, you hear absolutely nothing. And then besides the shells, another thing you're going to have to order online is one of these escargot pans. So these things are specially designed to hold the shells in place while they bake. And there are other things you can use, which I'll cover on the blog post. So if you do make this, which you won't, you don't necessarily have to have one of these pans. And then as far as how to put these together, could not be easier. I'm going to take my freakishly small wooden spoon and use that to put a little bit of butter in first. So we'll prime it with a little bit of our butter. And then, of course, we'll insert one of our moon snails. I thought I would try it again. Still doesn't work. So we'll pop in a mushroom half, push it in about halfway, and then we'll finish off by spooning in another teaspoon or so of the butter. And that is it. So I'm going to do 6 per person. And once those shells are filled and placed in our escargot pan, with the butter facing up of course, we'll place those on a foil-lined sheet pan, at which point those can go in a very well preheated 450-degree oven for about 10 minutes or until browned and bubbling. And when these came out of the oven, I was so excited because they looked exactly like the escargot from my favorite bistro. Unfortunately, that's where the similarities pretty much ended. But at this point, I didn't know that. So I transferred that to a plate, adjacent to which I had 2 pieces of equipment you're going to need to eat these. So besides ordering the shells, you're also going to need a snail fork and one of these escargot clamps. So at this point, I was pretty excited. Like I said, they look très magnifique. So I grabbed a hold of one, and I pulled out that piece of Snail-less-cargo, and it looked great. It was glistening with that garlic and parsley butter, and it tasted exactly like a half a boiled undersalted mushroom with some butter, garlic, and parsley on it. The good news, however, this stuff is still pretty amazing to dip bread in. So on that level, I thoroughly enjoyed this. And then just to make sure, I went in for another one, mostly to confirm my conclusion this was pretty much a huge waste of time. While the texture was not dissimilar to escargot, it really was missing that meaty, earthy flavor. And if you're wondering why I cannot eat like a normal person on camera, I wish I knew. It's like I've never used a fork before. But anyway, that's it. So, should you try this yourself? Probably not, unless you actually know a French bistro chef that just recently converted to vegetarianism and they're coming over for dinner. This would make a hilarious first course. So to those people I say I really hope you give this a try. And to the rest of you, I guess, April Fools. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.